Good evening, everybody, and welcome along. It is the evening of the 2nd of April 2025, and here we are with a live stream, which I'm sure won't attract any controversy whatsoever. I, of course, jest. Tonight, we're going to be looking at the work done by Alexandra Kollontai from all the way back in 1921, which is entitled Prostitution and Ways of Fighting It. Now, I'm looking at this because, of course, recently it was the anniversary of Kollontai's birth, and her work as one of the important leaders of the Bolshevik Revolution in the period of the Revolution, and later a distinguished member of the Soviet diplomatic corps, is something which should be far better known than it is. And her work on the liberation of women and her theories on the family and family development are also areas which should be better known than they are. And her life and her subsequent career in the Soviet diplomatic service shows really that despite what the bourgeois hysterics tell us, that the old Bolsheviks, the Bolshevik old guard from 1917, by no means were all wiped out by the evil Stalin. Those like Kollontai, who were on the wrong side of a inner party dispute, as she was when she lost a debate in the party when she was a member, one of the leading figures in the so-called workers' opposition. Her conduct afterwards shows that of a disciplined revolutionary, in that she accepted the fact that she had lost, went on to pursue a very important career in the Soviet Foreign Service, and held numerous posts, including that of an ambassadorship in Sweden, and played a role in running Soviet intelligence networks in the Nordic countries in World War II. Very important work. And she remained, to the end of her life, an important advisor to Vyacheslav Molotov, who always had valued her advice. So this is a revolutionary who led a very heroic life in the service of the revolutionary proletariat. So what are we looking at tonight? We're looking at her contribution to a debate inside the what was to become the CPSUB, Communist Party of the Soviet Union Bolsheviks, in the early 1920s, where Kollontai was looking at how to solve the problem of prostitution in the growing USSR, which, as she goes on to explain in the writing we're about to look at, is something which wasn't being handled, shall we say, entirely correctly at the time, and certainly wasn't being given the priority perhaps that it should have done. So, why do I choose to do this now? Partly because I read the essay just the other day for the first time in many, many years, and thought this would be an ideal thing to discuss on the live stream. But also it shows the correct attitude to prostitution, particularly prostitution in a post-revolutionary environment, where a workers' state has come into existence and the fight for socialism is a real thing. Because so many in the modern era, so-called socialists, so-called communists, etc., have not just accepted that prostitution exists and should always exist, but some of them have, in fact, like our old friends in the DSA, been positively promoting it as something which is a just regular work, like any form of exploitation, which of course it is not, or that it even is positive, or that it is even somehow liberating, which of course it is not. And we are looking at this because it's important to emphasize again the actual real attitude, the actual proper attitude that should be taken when it comes to things like prostitution, which is that we as communists should vehemently oppose it. We don't want to see the women mainly women who are forced into it persecuted or prosecuted, but we do want to see them leave that particularly heinous trade in human flesh. So this is what we're going to be getting to tonight, and I'm just going to post the link to the essay into the chat so you can all see the source to which I am referring. And I would encourage all of you to go and read the writings of people like women like Kollontai and Clara Zetkin, Nadezhda Krupskaya, and others, whose stories are not as well known as they should be. So, before we go any further, though, I'm just going to go and take a look in the chat and to see who is with us thus far. And we can do the traditional greetings. And if you have questions, be sure to throw them in, and I will get to them in due course. So be sure to like and share this stream if you haven't done so already. Let's take a look who's with us thus far. Hello to Nehat, who's written a number of things there that I'll come to later on. Hello to Thomas Wolfe, and hello to Orange, who says prostitution is contractual rape. Well, yes, that's a good way of putting it. Jonathan Foster says Kollontai disagreed with Brest-Litovsk and left the Bolsheviks. That isn't true. Now, she might have disagreed with Brest-Litovsk. I'm not discounting that, but she never left the Bolshevik Party. That is untrue. Hello to Svetlana. Hello to Victor. Hello to Gracinol. Hello to Goron Redbeard, who says, good evening, comrades from Sweden, where Kollontai spent time during exile and later serving as Soviet ambassador to Sweden. Yes, indeed. Hello to James Graham. Hello to Working Pole Incorporated. Hello to Johan Krober. Hello to Sophia. Hello to Alistair Page McGill, who joins us from Prague. Hello to Balkan Tourist, Bruce Albert, Ash, Down Under. Hello to Evgeny Nikolaev. Hello to Almir, who comes to us from the once and future socialist Yugoslavia. And hello to Enigma and Chandler Daversa, who joins us from Portland, Oregon. Ash is liking the new background. Okay, well, it was it didn't exactly take a lot of work. Maybe you prefer this to a green screen. Hello to Sid Hatfield. Hello to Boer Harbour. Hello to Florida Man from Tampa, Florida, where they're looking at changing the child labor laws. It's not just a Florida thing. The entire West will be looking at that pretty soon. Hello to Rista Kostadinov. Hello to Jeremy Turner and Vera Olafsdottir. Hello to you. Hello to Comrade Jawad. And okay, that's the greetings thus far. So be sure to, as I said, like and share the stream if you haven't done so already. We are live on Twitch. We are live on YouTube, Locals, and Rumble and X. So get sharing away if you possibly can. Now, we'll first of all get to Kollontai and her time in the Bolshevik Party. She came from a bourgeois family, it must be said, but wasn't a woman who took like the easy option. She dedicated her life to the service of the proletariat. Dedicated her entire life to building socialism in the Soviet Union, and remained a dedicated revolutionary to the very end of her days. She died at the age of 79 in 1952. So clearly her work is something that we should be paying attention to, particularly as it's such a vital issue as more and more, particularly women, but not exclusively women, but again, it is mostly women who are forced into prostitution in this time, in this place. So, in 1921, let's just set the scene. The Bolsheviks are now 4 years out from the October Revolution. So, by 1921, the Civil War is slowly winding down. It's been an intense and bloody affair, so running from 1917. It probably comes to an end properly in about 22 or 23, but it's clear by 21 that the whites have lost and that the imperialists have lost. But there's still roving bands of white counter-revolutionaries in the countryside. There's still white terror being imposed on workers and peasants. There's a hell of a lot of poverty, as Kollontai goes on to talk about it. Goes on to talk about that as a reason for the upsurge in prostitution in the Soviet Republic. And there's, of course, a lot of destruction still in place, because of the Civil War, because of the way in which that the whites destroyed the productive capacities of agriculture and industry. So it's a breeding ground for criminality, of which prostitution is one of those elements. So, and Kollontai is presenting an argument that the Soviet government has really not tackled this enough, and she was probably right at the time. So, what we'll do is we'll go through certain elements of this essay and talk about them bit by bit. So, first of all, she begins by talking about like the prostitution through a materialist, through the lens of dialectical materialism. So I'm going to read quite an extensive excerpt out to you now, where she talked about this. So, quote reads as follows. Our Soviet Workers' Republic has inherited prostitution from the bourgeois capitalist past, when only a small number of women were involved in work within the national economy, and the majority relied on the male breadwinner, in inverted commas, on the father or the husband. Prostitution arose when the first states, as the inevitable shadow of the official institution of marriage, which was designed to preserve the rights of private property and to guarantee property inheritance through a line of lawful heirs. The institution of marriage made it possible to prevent the wealth that had been accumulated from being scattered amongst a vast number of heirs. But there is a great difference between the prostitution of Greece and Rome and the prostitution we know today. In ancient times, the number of prostitutes was small, and there was not that hypocrisy which colours the morality of the bourgeois world and compels bourgeois society to raise its hat respectfully to the lawful wife of an industrial magnate who has obviously sold herself to a husband she does not love, and to turn away in disgust from a girl forced into the streets by poverty, homelessness, unemployment, and other social circumstances which derive from the existence of capitalism and private property. The ancient world regarded prostitution as the legal complement to exclusive family relationships. Aspasia, the mistress of Pericles, was respected by her contemporaries far more than the colourless wives of the breeding apparatus. So, what the basic message she's putting across there is that the prostitution is called the world's oldest profession. Now, I would say that title more properly belongs to priests, but priests, of course, have less honour than a prostitute most of the time. But also that the way in which prostitution is regarded changes according to the mode of production that dominates at the time. So she goes on to talk about how prostitution changes into the Middle Ages. So next part of this quote reads as follows. In the Middle Ages, when artisan production predominated, prostitution was accepted as something natural and lawful. Prostitutes had their own guilds and took part in festivals and local events just like other guilds. The prostitute guaranteed that the daughters of respectable citizens remained chaste and their wives faithful, since single men could, for a consideration, turn to the members of the guild for comfort. Prostitution was thus to the advantage of the worthy propertied citizens and was openly accepted by them. With the rise of capitalism, the picture changes. In the 19th and 20th centuries, prostitution assumes threatening proportions for the first time. The sale of women's labour, which is closely and inseparably connected with the sale of the female body, steadily increases, leading to a situation where the respected wife of a worker is, and not just the abandoned and dishonoured girl, joins the ranks of the prostitutes, a mother for the sake of her children, or a young girl like Sonia Marmeladova for the sake of her family. This is the horror and hopelessness that results from the exploitation of labour by capital. When a woman's wages are insufficient to keep her alive, and the sale of favours seems a possible subsidiary occupation. The hypocritical morality of bourgeois society encourages prostitution by the structure of its exploitative economy, while at the same time mercilessly covering with contempt any girl or woman who is forced to take this path. So, what are we looking at here? This is Colontai giving a rundown of the attitude towards prostitution of the hypocritical bourgeois. So the hypocritical bourgeois of the later 19th and early 20th century, unlike today in many respects, would formally condemn prostitution, would formally condemn those who were forced to engage in it, and would condemn, but probably to a slightly lesser degree, those Johns, as they're called now, who used prostitutes. That would be the attitude of the old-fashioned Christian morality at the time, which is where the hypocrisy comes from. Prostitution is the natural complement to the bourgeois family, which is where as Kollontai argues, the bourgeois man has the wife at home and then has the mistress or the prostitute that he keeps on the side for, shall we say, thrilling encounters off the books. And therefore, that is the utter hypocrisy. It's the pretense that there is this moral code which the bourgeoisie abides by. But of course, they do no such thing most of the time. And of course, we can make a broader point here, which is that the bourgeoisie makes its money via the exploitation of the bodies and the minds of the entire proletariat. So why would bourgeois men draw the line at not exploiting the body of a prostitute to get their thrills, whilst at the same time babbling on about God and morality and law? So that's the situation in the early 20th century with regard to the bourgeois hypocrisy. How does that compare to our situation today? Now, what's happened, as we've looked at in the episodes we've done on Marxism and human relations, is that the change to how prostitution is talked about has crept in really over the last 60 years or so. Formally speaking, a lot of this stuff is still illegal, but what's happened is that in the age of the internet, and in the age of shall we say post 60s liberalism, post 60s libertinism, where the attitude to things like pornography is relaxed, and pornography becomes a major profit center, and therefore, following on from that, the attitude towards prostitution becomes more and more openly in favor of it, and in the respect of bourgeois opinion. Bourgeois opinion moves from a situation where they hypocritically condemn prostitution to a situation where they disgustingly, warmly approve of it, and then try to get people to see it as empowering. This is the real change in bourgeois morality since the 1960s, which is that the bourgeoisie, in order to try and reinvigorate their political project, given that the economic base of the bourgeois in the West was getting hollowed out due to imperialism's natural process of sending capital overseas. Therefore, the economies, industrially speaking, of the West get slowly hollowed out. And the moral framework of the bourgeois use has to change as a result. And one of the reasons why that has to change is, of course, deindustrialization. But also, on the ideological level, the moral framework of the bourgeoisie proclaim has to change away from what you would call the Christian traditionalist point of view, towards there being where certain things were formally condemned, to being one where it is more and more a kind of libertinism which is promoted, and this is promoted in sharp distinction to the what was regarded as the rigid morality or the rigidity of the attempt at creating proletarian morality in the USSR. So, in comparison to the way in which the USSR tried to build a new morality, the libertine West, as part of its official propaganda, was portraying itself more and more as like an anything goes culture. Like you can redefine yourself constantly, you can engage in almost anything. And this, of course, naturally leads us to a position where something like prostitution becomes more and more out into the open, and becomes more and more something which is openly discussed and even promoted. And this was true back in the 1990s. It was starting to go this way. And then we get into the 2000s, where you have stuff like, the prevalence of like online porn and later on OnlyFans and stuff like that. And prostitution is suddenly then redeveloped again, and we go from hypocritical condemnations to, again, promoting it, which is what the bourgeois do now. Now, some in the bourgeois, of course, still want to return to the old hypocritical moralities, basically pretending to condemn it whilst ultimately indulging it and promoting it, because, of course, the bourgeois defending a system of the exploitation of all humans by the bourgeoisie themselves, of course, promote, whether wittingly or not, a system which, again, encourages prostitution. Any system where, as Kollontai says, like huge numbers of women workers in particular are left without enough to feed their families, like the selling of their bodies to perverted men, becomes like often the only way they have of making ends meet. And it's no coincidence that this is now promoted at a time when you've got, in the West, and at least, an increasing decay of the wages structure, of the ability of the wage packets of workers to last to the end of each month and provide for a family. As Kollontai says in this article she wrote, the lack of money, the lack of resources of women workers forces them towards prostitution, and this is why the bourgeois are now promoting it. They have no intention of paying women workers, or indeed any worker, enough to thrive on. And so what they do is they start promoting like things that are heinous social ills as something which is empowering. You won't have to wait too long before you see some influencer who's been paid a few quid to go out there and do a video on why child labour is empowering. It might already have happened, for all I know, but certainly that's something that the bourgeois would consider doing. So, going on then to talk about the attitude that communists should take towards prostitution in the new state, because Colontai in the article, which I would encourage everybody to read in full, talks about the fact that in the aftermath of the Civil War there is this huge problem of like still a lot of unemployment, still a lot of poverty, and roving bands of soldiers, which sometimes encourages further prostitution. And so this all needs to be tackled. And what she goes on to argue that the prostitution undermines working class solidarity in a socialist state. So, next quote I would say is this one. It reads as follows: "What is the fundamental quality of the working class? What is its strongest moral weapon in the struggle? Solidarity and comradeship is the basis of communism. Unless this sense is strongly developed amongst working people, the building of a truly communist society is inconceivable. Politically conscious communists should therefore logically be encouraging the development of solidarity in every way and fighting against all that hinders its development. Prostitution destroys the equality, solidarity, and comradeship of the two halves of the working class. A man who buys the favors of a woman does not see her as a comrade or as a person with equal rights. He sees the woman as a dependent upon himself and as an unequal creature of a lower order who is of less worth to the worker's state. The contempt he has for the prostitute, whose favors he has bought, affects his attitude to all women. The further development of prostitution, instead of allowing for the growth of comradely feeling and solidarity, strengthens the inequality of the relationships between the sexes. Prostitution is alien and harmful to the new communist morality." So, I'll go on to the next section there in just a moment, but what she says here is, of course, entirely correct. And bear in mind, as I say, she's referring to a post-revolutionary situation. So, applying it strictly to our own situation of late, decaying, rotting imperialism is a little bit different. But I think through our own political practice, we can follow this advice, which is that we, as communists, don't want to see women who are forced into selling themselves to be criminalized or arrested. There's a strong argument to say that the men who purchase these or try to purchase these women by the hour or the day are criminals, and certainly in a socialist society, such men would be criminalized. But in terms of how we conduct ourselves as communists in the period before the revolution, it's certainly the case that we shouldn't tolerate characters who endorse or, shall we say, promote prostitution. It's not something that any communist should be in the business of doing. Again, we don't want to see the desperate women who are forced into this situation, this very negative situation, like persecuted by the cops, but like men, and it unfortunately is mostly men, who promote the idea of sex work is work, who promote the idea of prostitution as somehow empowering. Well, this is a ridiculous reactionary concept, which is anti-working class. Again, what does Kollontai say? What is the strongest moral weapon in this class struggle? Solidarity and comradeship is the basis of communism. Like, you can't be a comrade of somebody who you are seeing as basically a piece of meat to be traded. So, like, the promoters of prostitution not only are not communists, these people are nothing better than liberals, which is the worst thing you can possibly call somebody. So I'll go on to read the next quote, and we will talk further about it. So, quote reads as follows. Prostitution is alien and harmful to the new communist morality, which is in the process of forming. The task of the party as a whole, and of the women's departments in particular, must be to launch a broad and resolute campaign against this legacy from the past. In bourgeois capitalist society, all attempts at fighting prostitution were a useless waste of energy, since the two circumstances which give rise to the phenomena, private property and direct material dependence of the majority of women upon men, were firmly established. In a workers' republic, the situation has changed. Private property has been abolished, and all citizens of the republic are obliged to work. Marriage has ceased to be a method by which a woman can find herself a breadwinner and thus avoid the necessity of working or providing for herself by her own labor. The major social factors giving rise to prostitution are, in Soviet Russia, being eliminated. A number of secondary economic and social reasons remain, with which it is easier to come to terms. Women's departments must approach the struggle energetically, and they will find a wide field for activity. So what she's pointing out there is that in the post-revolutionary society, yes, you can solve some of the material questions that are propelling women into prostitution, but you also have to wage an ideological struggle. And you have to wage an ideological struggle against the leftover elements of bourgeois ideology, and you have to wage an ideological struggle against those taking root back again. And this is something that was done to a large degree in the period of the dictatorship of the proletariat in the Soviet Union, which is waging ideological struggles against bourgeois ideology, and the struggle against things like prostitution, pornography, and other elements of bourgeois rot that seek to corrupt and corrode human relations. All of those things will need to be struggled against under socialism, and that struggle will need to go on for quite some time before the attitudes that have been bred through years and years, in fact decade upon decade, of tolerance for this rotten and reactionary culture under capitalism, and in fact capitalism's promotion of it, that needs then to be a struggle that continues throughout the early period of the dictatorship of the proletariat. It might need to continue for one or two generations. So the other few points that I want to come to here, and I'll just run through another couple of certain points that she makes here, which I think will be worth emphasizing. So she makes the point that that prostitution basically is stealing labor from the collective. So, like, women who are forced into prostitution should be offered the opportunity to leave it, should be directed to meaningful work under the emergent planned economy, and shouldn't be just packed off to prison somewhere. And she calls for the Soviet government to have a unified response to this, and therefore anybody who was involved in this should be given the opportunity to go into meaningful work, and that should be something which isn't seen as a punishment, but as joining the collective working class and joining the struggle for socialism. And again, it should not a question of punishing the women; it's a question of ending a grievous social ill which is damaging for the class solidarity of the proletariat. So, another point that she raises here, which is I think it's worth emphasizing, is where she says, quote, "The political backwardness of women and their lack of social awareness is a second reason for prostitution. The women's department should increase their work amongst proletarian women. The best way to fight prostitution is to raise political consciousness of the broad masses of women, to draw them into the revolutionary struggle to build communism." And that is, of course, absolutely true. Now, before that, she goes on to talk about material want that still exists in the Soviet Union in 1921, and that the the questions of wages, the questions of housing, the question of giving all women a solid material base, a solid material existence, where they're not dependent upon the whims of the male breadwinner or some pimp or some disgusting pervert who wants to pay her by the hour for the usage of her body. The establishment of the material basis for a decent life, that's a key part of this. But also, as Kollontai says, it goes hand in hand with political organization and education amongst both women and men, to be honest, about the fact that prostitution is an anti-solidarity activity, it's an anti-working class activity, and that particularly like the struggle for women workers is to make them aware that their place is truly in the class struggle to actually fight for the building of socialism, and that's a struggle to redress the balance of so many years of bourgeois propaganda, which of course dismisses the role of women in such a struggle. She goes on to talk about how the fact that the housing question in the Soviet Union hadn't been solved yet also encourages prostitution, and that needs to be worked out. But she also says, again, I'll quote this directly: the local women's departments must work in conjunction with the education commissions to raise the issue of the correct organisation of sex education in schools. They could also hold a series of discussions and lectures on marriage, the family, and the history of relationships between the sexes, highlighting the dependence of these phenomena and of sexual morality itself on economic factors. So that is, of course, absolutely correct and points to the agitational elements there that need to be carried through and consistently carried through as well. It's no good just doing like one lecture a year. It's like you have to give the younger generation a much more comprehensive and correct picture of how relationships and morality should be. And that you are building, as Kollontai emphasizes in this and other work that she did, a whole new morality, a whole new form of the family, a whole new way in which relationships are conducted. And I will just leave you with this quote for now about human relations, because she wrote a lot about this, where she says, "I will not take it upon myself to prophesy form that marriage or relationships between the sexes will assume in the future. But of one thing there is no doubt. Under communism, all dependence of women upon men and all the elements of material calculation found in modern marriage will be absent. Sexual relationships will be based on a healthy instinct for reproduction, prompted by the abandon of young love or by fervent passion, or by a blaze of physical attraction, or by a soft light of intellectual and emotional harmony. Such sexual relationships have nothing in common with prostitution. Prostitution is terrible because it is an act of violence by the woman upon herself in the name of material gain. It's also an act of violence against the woman by the man who's paying for it. That's my own addendum. Prostitution is a naked act of material calculation which leaves no room for considerations of love and passion. Where passion and attraction begin, prostitution ends. Under communism, prostitution and the contemporary family will disappear. Healthy, joyful, and free relationships between the sexes will develop. A new generation will come into being, independent and courageous, and with a strong sense of the collective. A generation which places the good of the collective above all else." Now, when Kollontai and others like her say we move beyond the family, the existing bourgeois family, you can hear out there a lot of the gender ideology freaks and the trads getting very upset. So what does she mean by the fact that the end of the family? What she means is the end of the bourgeois family, the idea of the isolated family unit, wife, husband, 2 kids, and a dog, which is the be all and end all for family development, and is often drowned in like a hypocritical false morality. So this draws from the work that Engels did in The Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State, where he analysed how the family changes dependent upon the economic setup of a particular system on the mode of production. So from hunter-gatherers through to the slave societies of antiquity, through to feudalism, through to capitalism, and of course through to socialism, and then to the highest stage of communism. At each stage, the way the family is structured looks slightly differently. Now, Colontai wrote an awful lot about this in other places, and maybe we'll go on to look at this in future episodes. But what she means when the family will be done away with, what she means is that the bourgeois family will end, and we will see the beginning of family, the socialist family, the proletarian family, will begin to evolve into a different shape, into a different set of relations, because it's rooted in a different economic system. Yes, the great bulk will still involve one man and one woman, but it will, when you remove the material desperation that affects, again, mainly women, but some men as well. When you remove that, what you do is you open up a genuine freedom in human relations that's not been seen before. Because if somebody can leave a relationship that is not working for them, where any love or passion that used to exist has gone, or that the two people just can't stand to live with each other anymore, when neither party will be materially disadvantaged to the point of poverty by breaking up that relationship and moving on, then it takes an enormous amount of pressure off individuals. And so that you can, more than likely, move from one monogamous relationship to another without the fear of being sunken into poverty as a result. And that's a huge change. And you started to see that in places like East Germany and the Soviet Union and other socialist countries, where divorce became something that was easier. And it didn't mean the end of family relations or the collapse in morality or any other hypocritical nonsense that the likes of Peter Hitchens bang on about. What it led to was like a more secure sense of genuine community, and also a reconsideration of what the family is, like from the bourgeois world, where the family is literally the household unit, to a consideration of the family being something which is more akin to an old tribe in the primitive communism era, but on a new and modern level. So as we've mentioned before here on this channel, whereas it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a whole a community to be a family. And so it's not just the direct blood relations, which are considered part of a family under communism. It's various different members of the community. It's and it's an acknowledgement of what is true under capitalism as well. But the capitalism doesn't want to acknowledge this, which is that that the raising of children is not just done by the parent. The raising of children is not just a matter of the two parents like instructing the child with lessons. Like children, as you will know if you've been a child or have children of your own, you'll know that when you were a kid, you were absorbing lessons, good and bad, from not just all the adults around you, but from the wider culture. And so you wonder why, like some kids, despite the fact that they apparently have respectable parents, end up doing like ridiculous or sometimes like antisocial things. Well, it's because that's what's promoted. That's what's promoted in our so-called culture. And it's not just the fault of the parents when some younger people go off the rails or something. It's a problem that's much wider. It's a much wider cultural and ultimately class-based thing. Because again, the people who are most often condemned for antisocial actions are those who are committing them on the ground level. Whereas the antisocial actions of the bourgeois, who destroy whole communities and whole countries, somehow escape criticism. But this is the point. Like the influences over family life come from far outside of the traditional bourgeois family unit, and so under socialism, we not only acknowledge that fact, but we seek to make it into a positive side of things, which is if you have a material, if you remove material want from families, if you remove the risk of ruin from them, if you make sure that every child has a very solid home and set of relations that they are born into and live in, then you will be removing the huge elements which cause instability and antisocial behavior to emerge, including, of course, the subject of the discussion tonight, which is prostitution. And so, again, Kollontai's point, which I think is worth dwelling upon, is that yes, you remove the material base, you remove material want, which removes the basis for prostitution to exist. Then you have to engage in a long-running struggle under socialism to educate both women and men as to how relationships in the new society are going to be, and that you develop a new proletarian morality. So I'll just conclude with how Kollontai concludes her essay with the following quote: "Comrades, we are laying the foundations for this communist future. It is in our power to hasten the advent of this future. We must strengthen the sense of solidarity within the working class. We must encourage the sense of togetherness. Prostitution hinders the development of solidarity, and we therefore call upon the women's departments to begin an immediate campaign to root out this evil. Comrades, our task is to cut out the roots that feed prostitution. Our task is to wage a merciless struggle against all the remnants of individualism and of the former type of marriage. Our task is to revolutionize attitudes in the sphere of sexual relationships, to bring them into line with the interests of the working collective. When the communist collective has eliminated the contemporary forms of marriage and the family, the problem of prostitution will cease to exist. Let us get to work, comrades. The new family is already in the process of creation, and the great family of the triumphant world proletariat is developing and growing stronger." Now, we could talk perhaps in future episodes about how a lot of Kollontai's ideas didn't come to fruition inside the Soviet Union, and many of them did, though. But we can talk about like which did and which didn't in future episodes. But I would encourage everybody to read this work that she did. It's a very good introduction as to how communists should view the question of prostitution, especially in the post-revolutionary world, and also how we should approach the question in our own organizations and inform our own debates with this in our current practice. So I will now go back over to the chat and see that we've got quite a lot of people making contributions. Again, be sure to like and share the stream if you have not done so already. So let's have a quick look at where we are at the moment. Again, be sure to go over onto the Rumble side to look at subscribing to us there, because there's always a need to build that side of things. We never know when the British bourgeoisie are going to pull the plug on this, so let's have a look. Okay, so going through the comments from the top. Greetings to Rob and Beans, who are on the wrong side of the Pennines. Foregoing bedtime to be here. Thank you for joining us, comrades. Florida Man says the children don't work hard enough here. Well, leave it to Ron DeSantis. He'll have the children working in some sweatshop before the end of the year. Hello to Paul McCord, and welcome to you, comrade. Sid Hatfield says children don't need to be in school, especially when there's no future for them. They need to be working by age 6 and earning their keep. That's the Ron DeSantis manifesto. It's probably the Keir Starmer one as well. I remember my philosophy professor back in Estonia says caustic grips vertical on ties. That socialist right to encourage people to get naked and copulate mindlessly. Well, she never did that. I mean, the one thing you could never say about Kollontai was that anything she did was mindless. But yeah, we'll get on to Red Love, which I think is what your possibly very reactionary tutor was talking about there. Okay. Hello to David Ball, joining us from Trenton, New Jersey, USA. And hello to Johan Krober. Svetlana says, on prostitution, after visiting London, Dostoevsky wrote that was horrified there were many thousands of prostitutes there. The time of Jack the Ripper situation was the same, if not worse. Yep, and again, it's something that Kollontai notes in that essay, that the number of prostitutes in places like Paris and London is like absolutely through the roof, whilst the bourgeois hypocritically issue condemnations. It's like, well, I wonder who's buying all the services of these women. I can't think who it might be. Who has the money to do that, you know? Hello to Jenny Lynn, our moderator. Good to have you with us. Hello to Marius. Okay. Hello to T.G. Wilson. Hello to Robert Svorinich. And Almir says, would it be right to make it illegal everywhere at the moment? Wouldn't it be more dangerous for women then? Capitalism, we know that nothing will improve for working class women. That's true. The best you can do in the current circumstances is try and alleviate the situation, fight for reforms, etc. But I mean, capitalism has nothing to offer like in the imperial core countries now. Like, you can fight for an alleviation of a situation, but really it's the fight to build the revolution that we must be engaging in. We don't rule out fighting for reforms and for alleviation of a situation, but we must always bear in mind that there's very little that capitalism can offer in terms of reforms now. Okay. Could be a video on base and superstructure. Yeah, you know what? I will make a note of that. Okay, hello to Nikki. And Marius is right. The legal and the illegal economy under capitalism, the distinction is purely on paper. There's plenty of stuff in the supposedly illegal economy which counts towards GDP. I'm pretty sure of that. You know, and organized crime does very well GDP-wise. Caustic Grip says commodification of human relations and human natural sexual impulses is not only exploitative, but also reproduces human relations based on the logic of commodification. Only commodities become real. Very true. Hello to David Greenwood, also on the wrong side of the Pennines. Hello to Bob Downs. Ash says prostitution is driven by demand, which makes trafficking inevitable, even if it is decriminalised. You notice that the sex work crowd were not very vocal on trafficker Andrew Tate. Well, Andrew Tate should have been invited to their conference, really. I mean, he was following all of their advice. But yes, that's why I said the emphasis has to be also on the education of men, and that human sexuality cannot be and shouldn't be reduced to a commodity. It is under capitalism, because everything will be reduced to a commodity, because everything will be seen as an opportunity for profit making somewhere or another. Okay. Judith says a man who pays for sex has to have very low self-esteem, because he's not playing the masculine role in courtship to win over women's favour, relying on his ability to pay for what is essentially. Yes, I mean, it's like the men involved in this situation are deeply fucked up. It has to be said. G.G. Wilson says sex is used to drive men to further alienate themselves and buy into capitalist ideology in the sexual selection field. Look up sexual selection theory. Interesting point. I will look that up. Colontai saw voluntary prostitution as labour deserters, just like the housewife. People should not coast off the labour of others. Yes, and I think that's the correct revolutionary position to have. It's like the place for all women, proletarian women, is in the revolutionary struggle. Colontai saw that as being absolutely crucial for the building of socialism, and she was right. We can talk in future episodes as to how the Soviet Union didn't strictly follow that some of the time, but as Kollontai wrote in one of her later essays, like, the Soviet Union had made huge strides towards liberating women, even if it didn't exactly go the way that she'd forecast in the early 1920s. Okay. Svetlana says, eradicating poverty is only the start. It won't stop prostitution. Combating drugs is key. There are also plenty of high-class escorts who are not exactly starving, so education is necessary. All very true. Chandler Deversa says Gorbachev's alcohol prohibition attempt had the same result as prohibition in the United States, the flourishing of a black market. Prostitution as another social vice would be the same. Not sure I agree with you about well, the reason why Gorbachev's anti-alcohol campaign failed, I mean, if it was ever meant to be taken seriously in the first place, is because alcoholism had been positively encouraged by the Khrushchevite revisionists since the mid-50s. And so to suddenly turn around and try and wage an anti-alcohol campaign in the later 1980s was always just going to have the effect of fueling the black market, because it wasn't done on a serious basis, and you weren't addressing, again, root causes, which is that the alcohol consumption had been promoted by the Khrushchevites at the very time that they were ending the proletarian dictatorship and pushing the working class out of its role as the ruling class in society. And alcohol was basically, I think, given to the Soviet working class as a substitute, in the same way that it is as a substitute for meaningful life, in the same way that it is given to workers in the West as such. Hence why it is, I always say that the Khrushchevites were bringing in bourgeois methods into the Soviet Union all the time. So it's no wonder that these bourgeois tendencies all exploded after being encouraged by the Khrushchevites for 30 years. And yes, as Aim Mudassi says, fight criminal gangs, and we could stand a chance of actually eliminating criminal gangs under the dictatorship of the proletariat. Sid says, all of that stuff, lumpen gangs, illicit drugs, prostitution, and all the other forms of exploitation emanate from the bourgeois class, full stop. Very true. Well, I would argue that prostitution can be stamped out under communism. It will take a long and protracted struggle, to answer Chandler Deversa's point, but it can be stamped out. Again, not overnight, but by removing the material conditions which force women into prostitution, and then waging a long ideological struggle against against pro-prostitution opinions, then we can, I would say, do away with it. There's no reason why it has to remain. With again, getting the material question right, and then getting the ideological struggle right, there's no reason why we can't eliminate this thing, this evil. Ash says, this is why I thought Honora was interesting. The brutally sad ending makes the prostitute realize what she really is to men who buy her. Interesting. I've not seen that. Sid says, entirely new human relations can be built, i.e. the community may take on a family form in many regards, help to raise and guide youngsters, etc. Yes, that's very true, what we were saying just earlier. Do you think it's men's predilection for multiple partners, aka infidelity, is biological or cultural? It's not biological by any means, I don't think. It's something which is promoted. In certain societies, it's been promoted in the past. But I think the hypocritical bourgeois morality is that Colontai refers to there is part of this. And like the bourgeois man is expected to basically have the wife at home and then a mistress, a prostitute, and whatever on the side. And under the new socialist morality, what would you have? Well, you'd have a better education and cultural influences on men once we started building proletarian culture, and you'd have as I said, the political struggle and the raising of the cultural and educational level. So you would start to see human relations in a more genuine way, in a way that wasn't cynical and exploitative, which is what people are being taught now. It's what younger people are being taught now by not just the influencers, but by the casual cruelty of late capitalist society. So I don't think it's inbuilt within men. It might take a couple of generations to move beyond it, but by changing the material basis and building a new morality through raising the cultural and educational level of all of the working class, then we can start to get over these things, these social ills. Grassy Knoll says, we have drive-up coffee shops here where the women wear skimpy bathing suits and some are paid to undress for the drive-up coffee customers. Well, that's fucking depressing, isn't it? Jesus. Almir says, those who claim it's liberating women are just trying to justify it and they're doing the bidding of the ruling class. That's true. That goes for most of the left. Potted Rodent says the capitalist system has to be removed before real structural change can take place. That's true. Svetlana says, yes, but Stalin banned abortions. There is plenty of evidence to show that a country does better where there is stricter sexual morality. Stalin's USSR and Augustus's Rome, for example. Yeah, I mean, there was the ban on abortions in that period of the Soviet Union, and there was the rewards being put in place for women who had more children. At the same time, there was more opportunities for women to actually be part of the ruling and the governing of society, and to pursue opportunities in terms of career paths that they'd never had under the Tsardom or under Russian capitalism. So it's whereas not all of Kollontai's ideas got taken on board, but as she herself said, like there were many, the situation for women in the Soviet Union was far superior than it was in any of the imperialist countries, for proletarian women anyway. Ash says, hang on, I'm just... people should check out the Soviet Sex podcast. It's a bit liberalish, but some interesting facts in there about gender relations. Okay. Svetlana says, alcohol consumption under Stalin was not at all high. Khrushchev deliberately promoted the sale of cheap vodka to bring more cash into the treasury. We have not recovered since. Another delightful legacy of the Soviet revisionists, the promotion of alcoholism. Okay, just going back up here. Xavier Coombs said, one of the saddest things is old 1988 posters of women being exploited for the first time in almost a century. Yeah, you could tell the degeneration in the Soviet Union by the way in which like women were again presented as objects to be exploited again. In the this started in the Eastern European countries and the Soviet Union in the 70s, and it again grew to nightmarish proportions in the 80s. But yeah, you could see the influence of bourgeois thinking on like when the Warsaw Pact countries in the Soviet Union started like selling products by like draping a woman in a bikini over the bonnet of a car and stuff like that. That was something which would never have happened in the dictatorship of the proletariat period, but we're told that this was great because this was the Soviet Union liberalizing. Of course it wasn't. It was backward reactionary nonsense. Sid says, same way heroin and cocaine are used here, the bourgeois can't give us a promising future, so they give us such drugs to get high. That's true. Mo1917 says, ending poverty will be the first step in ending prostitution, while ending bourgeois demand for anything they can pay for. Not having a society made in the image of the bourgeoisie is the answer. That's very true. Okay, just going through some more comments here. Enigma says, I've noticed over time when documentaries are on about the murder of Peter Sutcliffe, that's the man known as the Yorkshire Ripper, no one asks why the women who were his victims became prostitutes in the first place. A very good point. Alexandra Kollontai says, I believe addiction is rooted in alienation and psychological problems. I do not support any prohibition of psychoactive substances. Well, I mean, we're going to do an episode on the drug laws and the drug war pretty soon. I mean, that's another case of like bourgeois manipulation and hypocrisy in the extreme. I would say that this has to be approached differently under socialism and under capitalism. Under capitalism, the drug laws are literally there to throw working class people in prison. That's what it's there to do. And it's not there to solve any social problem whatsoever, and they never do. I mean, they've had a war on drugs for 50 years, and drug consumption has only increased because alienation and atomization has only increased. So again, like a full exploration of that is needed. Um, right. Okay. So right. With Khrushchev, they resurrected the beauty pageant. Says caustic grip. Yeah, very true. Right. Okay. So, coming to the end of the broadcast for this evening. Again, be sure to like and share the stream if you haven't done so already. Be sure to read the full essay by Kollontai on prostitution and ways to fight it. We've got coming up for you tomorrow the latest episode of Decline and Fall. So be sure to join us for that one. It's bound to be an absolute banger, as they say in the business, and more exciting things coming up on the Decline and Fall show in the near future. So, thanks to everybody who's tuned in. Thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. I'll be back with you again tomorrow. Again, as I said, with the Decline and Fall show. But until then, thank you, everybody, and good night.